Good morning. Welcome back to the TradNurse podcast. I'm Christine, and if you are new here, you probably found your way to me through my last video, the one I genuinely did not expect to go viral. So thank you for subscribing, for sharing, and for commenting. And about those comments, I read them, all of them, the kind ones, the thoughtful pushback, and yes, the ones that told me that as a Catholic, I had no business voting for Donald J. Trump, and in fact went so far as saying a vote for Donald J. Trump, and I'm quoting, is anti-Catholic. So here's the argument I keep running into, and not just in my comments. The Pope is more Catholic than Donald Trump on the issues, such as abortion. He's more Catholic on IVF, in vitro fertilization, more Catholic on transgender ideology, more Catholic on immigration. And therefore, a serious Catholic should feel the weight of that and should feel some spiritual distance between themselves and the man they voted for. I want to take that argument seriously today, and then I want to take it apart. Because here's my thesis, and I'm going to say it up front so you know where we're going. On the actual concrete, lived out policy questions that touch Catholic moral teaching on abortion, on religious liberty, on parental rights, on gender ideology, and on the protection of children. Donald Trump's record is more aligned with what the Catholic Church teaches than any major American politician of our lifetime. And not because he's a saint. He isn't. None of us are. But because we don't vote for saints. We vote for stewards of civil power. And on the things the church calls non-negotiable, his record speaks volumes. So today we're going to compare the actual record. We're going to be honest, including honest about what is imperfect. And we're going to talk about what it really means to call one candidate more Catholic than another. Because I think a lot of people are using that phrase without knowing what they are saying. And myself included. This is why I decided to do a deep dive on this. So let's start with the argument itself. The Pope is more Catholic than Donald Trump. On its face, yes, obviously, the Pope is the successor of Peter. Donald Trump is a real estate developer from Queens. And if you handed me a multiple choice test asking which one was more Catholic, it's obvious. But that's not what the argument is actually doing. The argument is being used as a political weapon. It's being used to say, because the Pope has expressed concerns about the American border policy or American political rhetoric or American conservatism, therefore a faithful Catholic cannot in good conscience vote for the candidate the Pope seems uneasy with. And that is a categorical error. And it's a category error I want to name clearly, because until we name it, we can't get past it. We can't say things that I saw President Trump's meme and I would not have voted for him. That's not logical. The Pope is not running for president. He is not a candidate. He is not on the ballot. He holds a spiritual office. His job, his actual defined job, is to guard the deposit of the faith, to teach, to sanctify, to govern the Catholic Church. His job is not to sign executive orders, appoint federal judges, enforce immigration, or regulate what happens in American public schools, or regulate the states to handle their state issues. President's job is, and those two jobs are different. When Catholics go to the polls, they're not choosing a spiritual father. They already have one. They're choosing a steward of civil power. The Catholic question at the ballot box is not which candidate vibes most with the Pope's airplane interviews. The Catholic question is which candidate, if elected, will govern in a way more consistent with what the church actually teaches about the human person, the family, and the common good. So that is a totally different question. And once you ask it clearly, The comparison that sounded so devastating, the Pope is more Catholic than Trump, starts to look like a sleight of hand. Because here's what you'll notice if you listen carefully. When commenters make that argument, they almost never make it on the issues where the church has defined binding, non-negotiable teaching. They make it on the issues where the church gives us principles and leaves the policy to prudential judgment. They'll cite the Pope on immigration. They'll cite the Pope on climate. They'll cite the Pope on tariffs and trade and the tone of political discourse. And these are all real concerns. And I'm not dismissing them, but these are the areas where the Catechism itself is telling us lay people where they have latitude. And then quietly, they skip the areas where the church has been unwavering for 2,000 years. The protection of unborn life, the integrity of marriage, the nature of the human person as male and female, the rights of parents over the education of their children, the liberty of the church to conduct her works of mercy without being coerced by the state. On those issues, the ones the church calls intrinsic, non-negotiable, always and everywhere binding, the comparison does not favor the position people are trying to make you feel guilty about. It runs the other direction. So when someone tells you the Pope is more Catholic than Trump, the correct response is on what? What teaching? What policy? And are you telling me we measure Catholicism now by proximity to a pontiff's personal political intuitions or by fidelity to what the church actually teaches? Because those are not the same thing. And any Catholic who's read a little church history knows they have never been the same thing. I've noticed that the church history is not as prominent as it is in the traditional Latin masses. So that's a distinction. So let's get concrete here. I want to talk about the actual record, because for me, everything is not just lip service. It is actual action, item by item, on the issues where the church has been clearest. And I want you to judge for yourself whether the argument that this candidate is anti-Catholic survives this with actual facts. First, on abortion. The Catholic Church teaches, without hedge or qualification, that abortion is the deliberate killing of an innocent human being. It is not a prudential judgment. It is what the church calls an intrinsic evil, always wrong in all circumstances for all people at all times. The Catechism is unambiguous. The entire moral tradition is unambiguous. And now let's look at the record. The first Trump administration appointed 3 justices to the Supreme Court of the United States. Those 3 justices were the decisive votes in Dobbs versus Jackson, the ruling that overturned Roe versus Wade in 2022 and returned the question of abortion to the American people for the first time in 50 years. So let's think about every American Catholic born after it was 1973. They grew up in a country where the federal courts had invented a constitutional right to kill the unborn. And that regime was ended because of the judges appointed by Donald Trump. That same administration reinstated and expanded the Mexico City policy, which prevents American foreign aid dollars from funding abortion providers overseas. It stripped family planning funds from Planned Parenthood. It defunded conscience protections for pro-life doctors and nurses. And it was the first administration in American history to send a sitting president to the March for Life. And the cascade from that, we have seen Planned Parenthoods close across the nation or consolidate because of lack of funding. So you can argue about his current posture on a federal abortion law, and you can argue about whether leave it to the states is sufficient from a natural law perspective, but I have my own concerns there and I will voice them. The alternative, and this matters for a prudential vote, was a political platform committed to codifying Roe federally, to stripping conscience protections, to forcing religious institutions to participate in abortion coverage, and to expanding taxpayer funding for abortion on demand through all 9 months. So what it did is it gave the power back to the Catholics. Between those two examples, the Catholic choice is not ambiguous, and no amount of papal disquiet about the tone of American politics changes the math of actual unborn children saved. Second, IVF, in vitro fertilization. And I'm going to be absolutely honest with you because I owe you honesty. The Catholic Church teaches clearly that in vitro fertilization is morally impermissible. It separates procreation from the marital act. It routinely involves the creation and destruction of embryonic human beings, and it treats children as products rather than gifts. The church has been consistent on this for decades. Donald Trump has publicly supported IVF as well as several other politicians. He has not proposed federal measures to protect and expand access to it. On this specific issue, he is not aligned with the Catholic teaching, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I'm not going to spin it. It is a real tension, and a serious Catholic voter has to sit with it. But notice what that tension is. And this is where we have to use a little discernment and decision making. It is not a choice between a Catholic position and an anti-Catholic position. The alternative platform doesn't oppose IVF either. It promotes it alongside elective abortion, alongside late-term abortion, alongside the creation of embryos for research. Neither American political party, left or right, today is aligned with Catholic teaching on IVF. So the Catholic voter is not choosing between a faithful option and a faithless one. She is choosing between two platforms that both fall on this question, and she has to weigh the rest of the record to discern proportionate reasons. So that is exactly the kind of discernment the moral tradition asks of us. It is not an excuse to vote for anyone. It is an explanation of how serious Catholics vote when no candidate is fully Catholic, which in America, that's the case. Now, third, gender ideology and the protection of children. Here, the church has been becoming more explicit, especially in the Vatican's 2024 declaration, which names gender theory as a grave threat to the dignity of the human person. The Catholic tradition teaches that we are created male and female, and that the body is not a separation from the soul, and that human beings cannot reinvent their own nature. The mutilation of healthy organs, the medical suppression of a child's natural development, the social coercion of young people into permanent chemical and surgical interventions. The church has no ambiguity about this. It is a violation of the person. And so let's look at the record. The Trump administration has issued federal orders defining sex in law according to biological reality. It has moved to end federal funding for gender-affirming care for minors, and it has protected women's sports and single-sex spaces. It has pushed back against schools for facilitating social transition of children behind their parents' back. The alternative policy platform was the opposite of all of this. It was federal promotion of gender ideology. It was pressure on states to mandate affirmation of transition as a condition of receiving federal funds. It was active insertion of this ideology into the military, the Department of Education, and the federal health policy. So tell me honestly, which of these two approaches is closer to what the Catholic Church teaches about the human person? It's not even a close call. Fourth, religious liberty. The church teaches that the state may not coerce the conscience of the believer, that religious institutions have the right to conduct their works of mercy in accordance with their faith, and that the free exercise of religion is a fundamental natural right, not a gift from the government. The entire Catholic tradition. The Little Sisters of the Poor, an order of religious women whose entire vocation is caring for the elderly poor, were sued by the federal government under a previous administration to force them to include abortifacient contraception in their health plans. The Trump administration settled that case in their favor, affirming that the government cannot compel religious women to violate their vows. That administration also rolled back the HHS, Health and Human Services, contraceptive mandate. And it defended religious schools' hiring rights, supported Catholic adoption agencies in court, and expanded conscience protections for pro-life medical professionals. And on the concrete, lived liberty of Catholic institutions to be Catholic in public. And that record is very clear. Fifth, parental rights and the protection of children in education. The church has always taught that parents, not the state, are the primary educators of their children. The entire tradition says it, and the state's role is subsidiary. Look at the record on school choice, on parental notification laws, on keeping pornographic material out of school libraries, on protecting children from being socially transitioned by school personnel without parental knowledge. One side of American politics has been building a wall around the rights of parents. The other side has been actively dismantling it, and at times explicitly arguing that teachers and bureaucrats know better than parents and what is good for the children. So which side is more aligned with the Catholic understanding of the family? Again, it's not even a close call. So now, what about immigration? Yes, the Holy Father has expressed concerns, and so have American bishops. And I take them seriously. But here is the part that gets left out. The Catechism, paragraph 2241, does say that prosperous nations should welcome the foreigner to the extent they are able. And then it says in the very same paragraph that political authorities, for the sake of the common good, may make the right to immigrate subject to juridical conditions, and that immigrants are obliged to respect the laws of the country that receives them. Pius XII said the same thing in 1952. And so here's the honest picture. On immigration, the church gives us principles in tension. Reasonable Catholics weigh them differently, and this is prudential. It is not a non-negotiable, and it is wildly disproportionate to take a prudential disagreement about border enforcement and use it to cancel out a non-negotiable agreement on the direct killing of unborn children. If you want to argue immigration policy, argue immigration policy. I'll have the conversation, but do not pretend that the church's prudential preference on migration outranks her definitive teaching on the right to life. It doesn't. And no Pope's airplane interview has ever made it so. So let's go on what moral Catholic actually means. Let's come back to the phrase that got us here. The Pope is more Catholic than Donald Trump. Here's what that phrase actually requires. If you unpack it, it requires us to believe that the measure of Catholic fidelity in American politics is how closely a politician tracks the personal policy preferences of the current pontiff, not the church's defined teaching, not the catechism, not 2,000 years of moral tradition. The current pontiff's current policy preferences. So that's an opinion. That is not Catholicism, and it is the same confusion that leads Catholic journalists on the right and on the left to treat every papal remark as if it carries the weight of a solemn definition. It doesn't, and the Church herself tells us so. Papal infallibility is a real and defined doctrine. It was articulated at the First Vatican Council in 1870, but is narrowly defined. It applies only when the Pope speaks ex cathedra, from the chair of Peter, defining a matter of faith or morals, to be held by the whole truth. However, in the modern era, it has been solemnly invoked twice. That's it, twice. A homily is not ex cathedra. An airplane interview is not ex cathedra. A press release on American immigration policy is not ex cathedra. These belong to what theologians call the ordinary papal magisterium, and they do deserve respect, but they are not infallible. And they are certainly not the standard against which American political choices are to be measured. And another thing, Catholics correcting popes with love and loyalty is a feature of the tradition. As I said in my last video, St. Paul withstood Peter to his face in the second chapter of Galatians. St. Catherine of Siena, the doctor of the church, wrote letter after letter to the Pope, begging him to come home and reform the church. They loved Peter. They told Peter the truth, because loyalty without honesty is flattery, and flattery is not a Catholic virtue. People pleasing is not a Catholic virtue. So when anyone frames the question as the Pope is more Catholic than Trump on the issues, what they are really doing is collapsing the difference between the Pope's office and the Pope's opinions. And they're treating every papal word as if it were the magisterium itself. And then they're using that confusion to try to shame Catholics out of a vote that was, in fact, more defensible than the alternative on the issues the church has actually defined. So I'm not going to be shamed to think a certain way, and neither should you. So I'll give you the shortest possible summary of what Cardinal Ratzinger said about exactly this in 2004, because it still settles the question. Voting for a candidate because of his support for an intrinsic evil, that is formal cooperation with evil and a grave sin. But voting for a candidate who holds some unacceptable positions, not because of these positions, but in spite of them for proportionate reasons, is not formal cooperation. It is permissible, and that is the church's own framework. It's not mine. It is hers. Apply that framework to the actual record and the actual alternatives. And the Catholic case for this vote is not anti-Catholic. It is one of the more coherent applications of Catholic moral reasoning you're going to find in American politics right now. So I want to close with something personal, because this is TradNurse, and the nurse part is not just branding. I spend my working life at the bedsides of patients. I've held the hands of people in their last hours and cared for the young and the old, and for the addicted, the mentally ill, immigrants, veterans, for people I agree with politically and people I do not. And nursing has taught me something about being a Catholic that no other vocation could. The people screaming at each other on the internet about who is the real Catholic, most of them have never had to make a decision under the kind of pressure that forms a conscience. Conscience is not a Twitter thread. Conscience is what you do at 2 a.m. when the monitor is alarming and you have 30 seconds to weigh the competing goods and you choose what you have to do. And that is what voting is. It is not a jersey. It is not a mood. It is a judgment made before God with the information you have about the real common good of a real country at a real moment in time. I made my judgment. I stand by it. I've walked you through the reasoning, and you can disagree with my weighing, and I will not call you anti-Catholic for disagreeing. And what I will not accept is the reverse. The claim that my vote, grounded in the church's defined teaching on life, on the human person, on the family, on religious liberty, somehow places me outside of faith. It doesn't. And I think on some level, everyone making that argument knows it doesn't, which is why the argument has to be dressed up in papal quotes and airplane interviews rather than actually engaging with the policy record, because the policy record does not go where the argument needs it to go. If you disagreed with me today, God bless you. Please subscribe. Argue with me in the comments. I read all of them. But if you agree with me, the same. But do not use what I said today as ammunition to question anyone's faith. The point of this episode is not to win a fight. The point is to reclaim the ability of faithful Catholics to cast a vote without being told they are anti-Catholic for doing so. The Catholic Church has survived the fall of empires, and she will survive this election. She will be here when our current political alignments are dust. Our job, yours and mine, is to remain in her, to be formed by her, and to vote as what we are, Catholics with our eyes open and unafraid. I'm Christine. This has been TradNurse. Until next time, pray for me and I'll pray for you.